Oh, yeah,
I'll go and get
yeah.
the hot dog and
That's
then
right.
eat it while I'm
You were
driving
in
around
like
the
Flynn
library to
then.
vote.
I will call to order the Finance Buildings and Grounds meeting, which was duly noticed on February 14th, 2025 through posting and notification of the press in accordance with Wisconsin Statute 19.84. And my safety meeting is somewhere. My message.
Word of man.
I'll give it right back. Sorry. All right. I thought it would be appropriate to share something on exposure to the cold. Exposure to cold can cause frostbite or hypothermia and become life-threatening. Infants and elderly people are most susceptible. What constitutes extreme cold varies in different parts of the country. In the southern U.S., near freezing temperature considered extreme cold. We would take a little bit of that. Freezing temperatures can cause severe damage to citrus, fruit crops, and other vegetation. Pipes may freeze and burst in homes that are poorly insulated or without heat. Here in the north, extreme cold means temperatures are well below zero. Yes, they are. Wind chill is a term used to describe the rate of heat loss in the human body resulting from combined effect of low temperature and wind. As winds increase, heat is carried away from the body at a faster rate, driving down both the skin temperature and eventually the internal body temperature. Animals are also affected by wind chill. However, cars, plants, and other objects are not, in theory. So really, I wanted to really talk about the next piece is frostbite. It's damage to body temperature caused by extreme cold. A wind chill of minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit will cause frostbite in just 30 minutes. Frostbite causes a loss of feeling and a white and pale appearance in extremities such as fingers, toes, earlobes, or the tip of your nose. Symptoms are detected. If symptoms are detected, get medical help immediately. If you must wait for help, slowly rewarm affected areas. However, if the person is also showing signs of hypothermia, warm the body core before the extremities. If you could actually see my fingertips, they are rather purplish red. I've unfortunately have gotten frostbite some years ago on really my fingertips. So it takes nothing for them to show the immediate signs of what it feels like now. So my hands are super cold and the fingertips are that too. But one of the other things, which was a recent effect, thank you, Wisconsin Association for School Boards, as I was walking, and this was the first night, my eyes watered. So with the wind and the watering eyes, it really dried my eyes out. I mean, right below, but also it's the effect of frostbite. I'm assuming it's frostbite or could be like dry skin, but it felt more like frostbite. I didn't feel it that week, but the next week, I really felt it, and then right under my eyes started to peel, and it was really pretty brutal. So even if you are covered up, if there's any moisture whatsoever, make sure you're getting that off you as quick as you can because of the possible effects of that. So I want to share my personal story. I knew where I was at and what I was doing, and I thought I was prepared for it, but not so much. Anyone else? Sure, safety. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Next, is there a motion to adopt the February 18th, 2025 Finance Buildings and Grounds Committee agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. That passes unanimously. Next is presentation of the fiscal year 24-25 year-to-date through January financial summaries and consider approval to move to the full board. Mr. McCray.
Thank you very much. Included in the board packet, as referenced in the agenda, are the the January expense, as well as the January revenue statements. I really want to, as you noted, most likely in your review of the packet, highlight a couple items, and that is really the percentage in terms of fiscal year to date. So even though we are now theoretically 7 months, or we actually are 7 months, there's nothing theoretical about it, into our fiscal year, we have not yet even reached the midpoint in terms of our budget revenue and our budgeted expenses, right? And it just is at times how our dollars fall, as well as how we receive our revenues throughout the year. Keep in mind our year begins July 1. We receive our first equalization aid payment in September, our second in December, and just now in January and February, we're receiving our tax revenues from our local municipalities. Keep in mind those are a little bit later than they have been in years past, and that is really an element of a change in processes between the city and the county, to where the city is now asking, and has been for the last few years, the county to process the tax bills and the collections. So it has delayed it a little bit, more than it has in past years. Certainly they make, if not amends, but everything comes through at the end, but it does delay us from a cash flow standpoint, and evidently a revenue standpoint as well. So just some highlights in terms of kind of how our budget flows, even at this point of the year.
Any questions for Dan about any of the financials? Seeing none, is there a motion to move to the full board for approval?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. That passes unanimously. Next is information on 2 March 2025 debt issuances resulting from the voter-approved November 2024 facilities referendum. Mr. McCray.
Great, so I'll do a little bit of an introduction, and joining us this afternoon is Tom Griggs. Tom serves and has served as district's bond counsel for a number of years. I don't want to say decades, I'll just go with a number of years. But we're happy to hear from Tom later on. Typically, we don't bring folks before you, but this is just a bit of a nuance as we look to this upcoming borrowing. Doesn't put it in jeopardy or anything, as I outlined in the memo. We just have a few more corners to turn. We spent a great deal of time between Baird, Matt Sylvester Knutson, our Director of Finance, myself, and Tom. Even during the joint convention week, we spent probably about a good 2.5 to 3 hours just kind of meeting and ensuring that we were compliant. I'll backtrack a little bit. You have a 2-page memo in your packet. Thank you very much for taking time to review that. Just a couple items. One, we always want to, when we have an opportunity, I know Superintendent Holtzman does as well, is thank the voters for their continued support, not only on the operational referendum, but certainly the investment in facilities. And we'll be talking about that facilities investment beyond 2 bond issues a little bit later on in the agenda. But we're always very grateful. Keep in mind, and we shared this also in December, that the board will be taking action next week on a parameters resolution. The parameters resolution really just provides administration with a little bit of latitude on the sale of those 2 bond issuances, right? So rather than a specific point in time, regardless of market conditions, it allows us the opportunity to kind of hopefully land at a little better rate rather than landing on the rate at a day. So you'll see action on that, or proposed action, next Tuesday. A lot of information, and I kind of tried to outline a little bit in terms of what we've been doing since the voter-approved referendum. And you see that kind of in about 5 bullet points in the issuance of general obligation bonds, promissory notes, just the different things we're doing. We're certainly working with Tom Griggs, we're working with Baird, we're working with Disclosure Council, who in this case happens to be Quarles. Think of Disclosure Council, and this is kind of my way of putting it, as the seal of good housekeeping, right? It just really is an assurance to potential bond buyers that the district is intending to use the funds and is also very as intended, as well as we're just very fiscally transparent in terms of our district financially. So a little bit of the structure, and this is where I'm going to turn it over to Tom. He'll come in terms of what we kind of have to navigate a little bit. state, local government investments. So what exactly are those, and perhaps why we're doing that? I will caution you, it's a bit of a rabbit hole, but we're not going to go too far down the rabbit hole, because if I do, you'll be sleeping and we'll be here till 7 p.m., and I don't think any of us want that. So in summary, as I shared, we're a compliance-driven entity. The district is structuring the sale of bonds in 2 issuances, 139.3, and then we're refinancing the ban of 12.5. All that adds up to the 151.8, and we're targeting March for that sale. So we expect to go with no problem. I'll turn it over to Tom. He'll go into some technical review, and of course his memo was also included in your packet. And again, thanks for reviewing that.
Thanks, Dan. You have a copy of what I call my executive summary in your packet there. I won't go through that word for word, but the bonds and notes that we're going to issue here for the project that was approved at referendum last November are tax-exempt bonds. Now, why are they called tax-exempt bonds? Well, they're tax-exempt because the interest income that a holder, you buy one of the bonds or notes, excuse me, and you receive the interest income, semi-annually, that interest income to you is exempt from federal income tax. So that's why they're called tax-exempt bonds. Now, because of that, the federal government, particularly the United States Treasury and the IRS, take a keen interest in tax-exempt bonds because they view it, and it is, a drain on the Treasury, because if you can issue bonds tax-exempt, you can issue them at a little lower interest rate. And so that means that the federal government will not be taking in as much, in taxes on that income. Now, so they take a keen interest in that, and the result of that are a plethora of regulations that govern these tax-exempt issues. In this case here, the interesting thing about your project is that it's a long project. It's a good 4.5 years. And as I pointed out in my memo here, the regulations favor projects that are in more of a 3-year time frame. And so because of that, because we're in this 4.5 to 5 year time frame with our project, we deal with some stricter rules in terms of once those funds are borrowed and until they're spent on your project, you have an ability to invest those monies and make a return on those investments. And that's where the regulations sort of put the hammer down a little bit in terms of what you're able to do. So as I said in the memo here, the regs tend to favor a three-year projects, but there's an allowance for 5-year projects like ours, but it requires a little more careful treatment in terms of how those funds can be invested. Like Dan said, we won't go down the rabbit hole because we could be here for a long time talking about that. So in this case here, once the funds are borrowed, the investments are going to be, particularly on we have 2 borrowings here. We have the $12.5 million that will refund the ban issue. That isn't affected as much by what I'm talking about here. What's really affected is the second borrowing, the 139.3. So once those funds are borrowed, and until they are spent, they will be invested in special investments that the Treasury provides for projects like this that are going to extend beyond this 3-year favored period. And as I point out in the memo here, what that results in is probably a little less investment income over that time period. Not necessarily so, but it could result in less investment income. So that's what we're looking at. This is why we had the long discussions at Baird, trying to sort through the issues to figure out, the path that we wanted to take. And like Dan said, we just have a few more curves and corners to go around to comply with the regulations, the federal regulations as they relate to these tax exempt borrowings. Any questions?
Hi. So the money that we would get in investment income, is that right?
Right.
From this, is that federally taxed?
No, that is
So
not.
nothing is federally
Yeah.
taxed then? Okay,
That's correct.
okay.
Right, you're a tax exempt entity, so income that you earn is not taxable under the federal tax law.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So, if I may follow up on that. So any numbers I use, consider them hypothetical, right? So they're not actual rates for today. So if we went out to the marketplace today in a normal issuance, and maybe we would get, when we invest those funds, approximately, we'll say 4.15% in interest, right? Because of the issue that Attorney Griggs mentioned, we'll most likely have to invest in a state and local government instrument, and that interest rate is maybe anywhere, it depends upon the market as well, but it's less than the 4.15%. So we'll have less of a return. Some of the risk that I referenced is we maybe could have broke this up. I'm a little risk averse. Tell me what the interest rates for borrowing will be in a year. So we modeled 5.25% when we went to referendum. So we model high, most likely knowing the marketplace will be lower. So it's probably 5.25. We're probably, and again, don't quote me on this, about 100 basis points less than what we modeled, which is good for taxpayers. But if we were to break that issue up and we issue a portion of it now at, let's say, 4.25, a year, the market could be 3.75, or the market could be 5. And so when it goes higher, it costs our taxpayers more, even though we modeled 5.25. So it's us being very conservative and really looking out for the best interest of our taxpayers when we're issuing this. Superintendent Holtzman just may not have quite as much money as he had hoped in interest income, and me as well, right? Had we not had to navigate this issue.
Anything else?
Yeah, so, and I know the last time, and you weren't here, Mr. Griggs, but as we talked about arbitrage and how that factored into what we were potentially doing, is that still relevant? Or because our earnings will be less, then does that potentially take that off the table?
Yes, it would take that off the table. There is a possibility that because of this special investment that Dan mentioned, these state and local government securities, state, local government, SLG, they're called slugs for short, that this special instrument that we'll invest in, all of the investment income that you get from that, you get to keep. And take Dan's example, if you go, what did you say we borrow the money at?
So let's assume we borrow at 4.25.
So we go at 4.25. Currently, those slugs have a return or a rate of 3.33%. If the market starts going the other way and rates are going up, and our rate is 4.25%, and the rates on those slugs exceed the 4.25%, you get to keep that too. So is that going to happen? Who knows? But it could. But you mentioned arbitrage. And let me just try to succinct, and I put a little footnote in there, but if you borrow money, the arbitrage regulations, the federal regulations, if you borrow money at 4.25%, and over the life of, spending that all down, your investment return is at 4.25% or lower, you get to keep all of that investment income. If your investment return is higher than that, then those arbitrage profits have to be rebated and paid back to the federal government. There are exceptions that you can qualify under. Unfortunately, because of the length of our project here, we can't qualify under those exceptions. You mentioned arbitrage, and so the sort of simple rule out of all of that is you can keep all of your investment income up to the point of what you're paying, what interest rate you're paying overall on those notes or bonds that you issue. And anything beyond that, you may have to pay back to the federal government. But in this case, because of the special investment that we're doing, if you do exceed that 4.25%, you get to keep that.
Sorry, we can look down the rabbit hole but not go all the way.
Yeah, it's very easy to go down the rabbit hole in this stuff.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
I do want to thank Tom. His counsel has served us well before my tenure and during my tenure. I really appreciate him taking Matt, Sylvester Knudsen, and myself, the administration, kind of a little bit through the curve here. The book, the regulation book that Tom referenced, I kid you not, is a good 4 to 5 inches thick. And then we asked Tom during one of our work sessions, so how often have you encountered this? And I think your response was,
Yeah, this is very unique.
so it's unique. I think one of the reasons we want to also bring Tom before you is it's been our goal to not only just provide transparency, but some clarity, right? We could have gone through this and really not said a word, right? And we would have been, of course, legal and above board. It's just really, I think, our goal as a business services group, just to, again, provide transparency, and then even beyond that in terms of clarity, so you kind of know what's going on as elected officials.
Thank you very much. Okay. Next, information on business services performance improvement measures. Matt, welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here to talk about some of the process improvements and accomplishments we've had within the business services group, especially over the last 5 years. Let's see. Perfect. So when I think about the business services group, one of our core values, I would say, is having a growth mindset and really wanted to continuously be making improvements. When we look at making improvements, we take it from the approach of planning, doing, checking, and acting. Specifically, when we have a new idea, we plan internally within our business services group, kind of huddling up, processing or throwing out ideas. We develop a prototype. We then roll it out to a select number of people, maybe a specific school, a specific department, get feedback from that small group, improve the process, and then roll it out district-wide. So the next 3 slides are just a listing of probably close to 40 different improvements that we've implemented over the last 5 years or so. Some of you may know I was with the district for about 2 years, 2015 to 2017, before going to another district for just over 4 years. And when I think back to that time, we were so paper-based. And I'm just really proud of where we are today, nearly a decade later, and how electronic and how much more modern we are as a department. So I'm not going to talk about all of these improvements on these 3 slides. I'm going to highlight 5 different processes or accomplishments specifically. But certainly this is in board docs if you do want to look at the list. And then if you're looking at the list and you say, I'd like to know more about X, Y, or Z, certainly feel free to reach out to Dan or myself. So the first process improvement I'll talk about is probably one of my proudest accomplishments, something I'm really excited about that we started back in the fall of 2021. So it's a semi-automated invoice processing. So we have certain vendors, think of Van Gelderbos, Amazon, where their invoices are structured the same. There's a huge volume of them, but they're consistently formatted. So we have a process that we've implemented where we get them via email. They go through some automation processes where they parse out the data of the invoices, go through some other processes, and end up in a repository where we can easily transfer that into Skyward with just a few clicks. Actually, internally, we call them clicky-click invoices because it's like 2 or 3 clicks. So rather than hand typing those invoices, it's clicking. So just a couple of screenshots included here. So this is the repository of where these invoices go, and then our accounts payable specialist can copy some of that data. It's actually just one field that she copies out of there and pastes it onto the Skyward side here, and it fills out the invoice. So it's literally 2 or 3 clicks. So on that last slide, I showed that we have processed nearly 19,000 invoices via this clicky-click method since the fall of 2021. And for comparative purposes, for our fiscal year 23-24 in total, so all invoices, we processed 18,000 invoices. So it's nearly a year, over a year's worth of invoices that we've been able to semi-automate. Next one I'll highlight is more of an accomplishment instead of a process improvement. And kudos to Tammy Carlson, the district's financial analyst and grants manager. So on top of managing her ordinary entitlement grants every year, she was managing over $26 million of one-time federal funding, the ESSER grant series. So 3 different installments, 3 different grant packages there. That was just a tremendous workload for Tammy and others within the district, especially during the already difficult time of the COVID pandemic. So that required a lot of private school and community collaboration, especially with the ESSER 1 grant. We managed the private school component of that. There were 2 major capital projects going on, also managing the safe return to in-person instruction and all of the reporting related to that. Those 2 major capital projects, the Craig and Parker greenhouses and the Franklin IAQ indoor air quality projects there. Another improvement I want to highlight was created with the intent of having an easier way for principals, department leaders to access financial data. So Skyward is our ERP system, our financial system and HR system. In the past, principals, department leaders would go into Skyward and they would run reports out of there. So what we developed is a way to get that data out of Skyward every night, run through some processes in the back end, and send them out to what's called a Google Looker Studio dashboard. So I'll show that on the next slide. So maybe if you've heard of Tableau, I'm trying to think that's probably maybe one of the more common dashboarding kind of data visualization systems. It's a fully interactive dashboard that principals and department leaders have access to. So when they log into it, they see just the budgets that they have access to, that they're in charge of. They can click on any of them and drill down into them. We also have targeted spending goals. So we highlight that on there, as well as the percentage of the school year that we're through. And then on our end, so specifically for Dan, myself, and Tammy, we have a district-wide business services group dashboard. So we can see everybody's spending by area at a very high level. And then similar to the department leaders and the school leaders, we can drill down on that. Fourth item I'll highlight is both an accomplishment and a process improvement. So nearly a decade ago, a group of school districts in Wisconsin got together with the intent of sharing compensation data. So the state, for I don't know how many years, has collected compensation data for certified staff. They make it publicly available, but it's not really, doesn't always represent the full picture. And it's not necessarily as much detail as we would want to make decisions. So a group of districts in the Dane County area got together with the intent of sharing this data. So Janesville started participating in the 2021-22 school year. And a shout out to Kristen Ostrander. She's the district's Skyward Business Specialist. She's been heading this up and really doing the work for this. So every year we share our compensation data for all employees to this group of districts. Someone there compiles all of the data and shares it out. So Kristen is the one who is extracting our employee compensation data, going through it, scrubbing it, cleaning it up, normalizing it, making sure it fits all of the standards, and it aligns to other districts. And then she submits it to the collaborative, and they share out the data back to us. So on the next slide, you can't see the compensation here. I didn't include that, but it's just an example. So it's a massive Google sheet, thousands, tens of thousands of rows of employees in districts all around the state. So we can see what their name, their job title, years of experience. We can see hourly rates, salaries. So it's really great for us to be able to make data-driven decisions then for specific employee groups. And the last accomplishment or improvement I'll highlight is the standardization of a card reader and point of sale system. So, not sure about you, personally me, I don't necessarily carry a lot of cash, or I'm not paying things in cash, but we are largely a cash and check entity for in-person payments. So paying your fees in person, making purchases in person. So this last fall, we started with the Craig Cougar Corner Store, where we selected a credit card reader point of sale system that meets the highest standards for the payment card industry that handles processing credit cards to make sure it's a secure platform. And we rolled it out at the Craig Cougar Corner Store first in the fall. So with this, students can now pay, or parents or teachers, anyone visiting the store can pay with cards, Google Pay, Apple Pay, and even Venmo, which is great, which is very, very modern. So we started it there, tried it out for a few months, assessed how that was going, determined that that's working really well. We then purchased some card readers for the ESC. We tried them out with the Parker Arts Academy, so if you've gone to performances and paid in person, you might have seen that. We then, earlier this winter, we rolled it out to Parker. They also have a school store, the Barn, so they've been using it for a couple months as well. And then just a couple weeks ago, we rolled it out to Craig's bookkeeper or banker. So that's the person at the building who's collecting fees and just different payments from students. So in the past, she had a physical receipt book, if you can think of a two-part receipt book, handwriting receipts for students, entering them into spreadsheets for us. So now she's able to ring up that transaction on an actual point of sale system. It prints a receipt for the student. She codes it in another system so we can account for it properly in our general ledger. So really cutting down on some of those paper manual processes, and then just giving options for students to be able to pay with digital means instead of always cash and check. So thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to just highlight some of the accomplishments that we've had. I just want to give a shout out to Dan. He's really been fostering this environment, this culture of creating these improvements. Thank you.
Fostering is better than tail twisting, although. So Matt, you're gonna run away and we're not gonna ask questions? Committee questions? Well, I can't let you get away with no questions. And I'll kind of work backwards. The point of
Certainly.
sale, the point of sale system, are we expanding that to like events and, I mean, I think of like concessions. Just being able to manage it a little different way, and let me be authentic here. I thought of like the Craig Show Choir. I mean, because I know it has been a few years now, but I know how much money ran through that one, and I was just curious if we were expanding it to events, really.
Yes, that's a really good question. So the Spotlighters in particular at Craig have been trying out a system, and there has been some turnover in the staff, so I'm not sure how consistent that's been over the last few years. But I am working with the new teacher, Carrie, to have the card readers for the event. I believe it's in March. So yeah, they'll be using that for admission as well as concessions.
And are we doing it, well, I said that, but like as basketball, football, whatever games and things?
Yeah, so the actual ticketing to athletic events is a separate system that the athletic department is handling and leading that. The concessions aren't run by the district for athletic events, so that doesn't run through us. Yes.
I'll make to highlight that, so.
Yes. Good question.
And maybe this is an ask more than, well, I'll just say it, as we look at the compensation data and as we approach the staffing plan, then it's like, well, I know we don't necessarily capture the staffing by building throughout the year, but is that something that could be, I guess, no, maybe developed isn't the right word, but shared in a manner that would make sense as we're looking at the staffing plan? And not so much that, that matters, but, I mean, if there's one thing that we have responsible, it's the fiscal responsibility. So it would be a way to definitely tie the staffing plan to the expenditures as we expand that to say over the whole district. So maybe not quite the dashboard, which would be my next question, but kind of the half step to that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So one of the items on the list of about 40 items is what I think I phrased as a general ledger cleanup. So if you think of our account numbers, we have tens of thousands of account numbers. So we're working on standardizing them and also getting them to a point where they're coded by building so that we can do some more of that analysis. Sir?
So I'd say administratively, we have a good collaborative relationship as we work with Human Resources and certainly Superintendent Holtzman. So even as we move into, we'll say, bargaining, some of the compensation analysis at the aggregate level in terms of average teacher pay, highest teacher pay, right, really helps and I think inform as the board goes through negotiations and administration with negotiations in terms of just working with staff. The data is as good as individuals submit the data. Right, so there could be always an off point, right? Sometimes you will see something, and this is where when Matt referenced Kristen scrubbing the data, even as when we get the aggregate data back, as you go, that person makes that much? Is that correct? So then Matt and his relationship, myself, Kristen, is we'll call someone and say, can you validate that? Oh, yeah, that's wrong. So I'll give you just even a recent example as we were looking at a particular special education staff, in a particular grouping, occupational therapy, we'll say as an example, right? So we saw something and we were curious. That individual happened to be from Edgerton. So we called Tad Wayner from Edgerton, the Director of Personnel and Finance, and say, hey, can you tell me a little about this data point? He goes, yeah, that's error, right? So that we know, and then when we're presenting that information, like we can kind of clean it up a little bit ourselves. I think as Matt was talking about real quick about the general ledger cleanup, and we haven't highlighted this during my tenure here, but there is a report called school level reporting. So we can break that out by building. So we can compare state and local and federal expenditures for, let's say, Adams Elementary to, I'm trying to think of the last one, Wilson Elementary. And so we can see there are differences. Well, why is that? Well, we can pull the data out of Skyward, scrub the data, and it may be the fact that there's just a more tenured staff at Wilson than there is at Adams, right? But then it goes to also asking deeper questions in terms of, are we aligning resources correctly, right? Is the building resourced correctly? And I know that's been part of Superintendent Holtzman's conversations at the director's level in terms of, are we resourcing correctly? Right, so having good data to help drive those decisions is important, and the data comes out of employee management within Skyward and certainly the general ledger that Matt has really been focusing on, not just this only thing, but one of his priorities as he's come to the district.
Maybe it's because we talk all the time, but that's really what I was looking or thinking toward is when we we see the staff, we see the number of students, and we know that all students aren't equal and all staff aren't equal. And is it the case that really there should be a tweak to that? And I know it's not necessarily our job to do that, but it's our job to ask the questions. So and I know we haven't been in position to really ask that level of a question, but I'm like, are we getting there? So that kind of addresses that.
And some of it, as the committee knows and as the board knows, right, is this is where when we look to what are our revenues like? Because how are we comparing in a Rock County environment where we have less than 4% unemployment? and we're competing, whether it's for a entry-level worker or a non-degreed worker, right? What does that look like? Or in a degreed worker, right? So how are we competing with folks, whether it be Target, Dollar General, Prent, right? Because we're all competing for a custodian or maintenance or that paraprofessional or that certified teacher when we're looking to Edgerton, Evansville, Turner, right? So having that good data to where we can attract and retain talent is certainly very helpful.
One last, I don't know if it's a request or quested, but
Certainly.
as far as the dashboard, the building, the department level, and not so much curious about having access to it, but even as snapshots. Because for us, we see the buildings and we know that they're developed that way, but we don't have a frame of reference. And I think a lot of the questions that we had in our workshop from Commissioner Mary was really driven by some of that. So as we can flesh out what can be shared in a manner that would be not onerous to provide, but to provide some level of detail for us, I mean, it's just something to think through. And if you need ideas, I have some.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate it. We've come a long ways from where it was when I first started sitting here to where we are now. So thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am. Thank you.
All right, next, information on district revenue per student. Mr. McCray.
Absolutely. So I have a handout. I was holding it. I didn't want you to be distracted. Then we're just going to go through a little bit of an exercise. Well played, sir. If you want to follow along the worksheet that we're going to go through, and actually I should probably get into my slides just a little bit, you actually have a calculator. So do not feel obligated, feel welcome. We found these calculators, we had to dust them off a little bit. They're still hermetically sealed. When we borrowed them from Gretchen in Learning and Innovation, she says it's okay if you don't return them. So if you would like to take them with you, feel free to do so. If you want to return them, that certainly works as well. A couple of weeks ago, we had a question, and this is my attempt to take us through that question. Want to keep in mind, you've seen this slide before, there are three really huge elements that we're looking at. So we're anticipating our FTE, our membership, to remain relatively stable. We're also looking at our revenue limit authority to remain at $325 per member in terms of an increase. And we're looking at the revenue limit ceiling to remain at $11,000. It's actually technically $11,325, and then we'll add another $325, but the low ceiling is $11,000. We're just growing beyond that. We're not going to go through this. You have seen this before, in particular during the annual budget hearing and maybe any other time I happen to throw it up on screen. This is the district's revenue limit worksheet for the 2024-25 year. And there are many elements that we'll go through on the 11x17 ledger paper that are also on here, but just kind of wanted to show you the revenue limit worksheet. This is another kind of awful, unless you happen to really work in business services and can appreciate, this is the equalization or the general aid worksheet. I'll leave it essentially with a few comments. One is we are aided on what we call shared cost. Shared cost are state aids and local taxes. Gate receipts are not a shared cost that we would receive aid on. Federal grants are not a shared cost we would receive aid on. So it's really what we tax for. So we would receive aid on that roughly $51.5 million local tax, and then the other balance, including equalization aid, of probably 80 some to 90 million in state aids. That's what we share our cost on. So we're not going to take you through this, but wanted to show you that there is a worksheet available. When we look at revenues by source, and this is just really Fund 10, is we could see local, which includes all local sources from taxes to gate receipts to mobile home fees. That is all in local. Other school districts, the 5.2 million is the revenue we would receive from open enrollment. Intermediate is a bit of a nuance, and that's a transaction related to us and CISA. I wish I could give you an example. I think I want to say it is Perkins, perhaps. Matt's going to correct me. I'm probably wrong, but we have 94K there. State is not only our equalization aid, but it's our per pupil aid. It's any other aids we receive from the state of Wisconsin. It could be a mental health grant, right? That would fall into state aids. Federal aids, the 9.6 million, includes not only, we'll say, our title allocations for 1, 2, 3, 4, but also we had a little bit of a carryover into this fiscal year related to ESSER funding. And miscellaneous income would be a workers' compensation dividend, a sale of property, a refund of a prior year expense. Those would be examples of other incomes. So in general, it's 146 million in local revenues. And state revenues, sorry, and federal revenues. Fund 10 revenues is what I meant to say. Thank you, long day. Okay, so you have an 11 by 17 worksheet with you. It's an element of our revenue limit worksheet plus. So the question was raised, so how much money does the district receive per child? And I stood at the podium and I said, well, it's $11,325. And I probably went a little too far down the rabbit hole because it's not that linear, and that's really the intent of this exercise. So as you go through, you'll see there are 4 points. 1, membership drives the district's revenue limit. Enrollment does not. Property taxes or property valuations do not. It's truly our members, and members are students who reside within the boundaries of the School District of Janesville and attend either Janesville schools or another public school. Children who attend St. John Vianney or go to Lakeside Lutheran in Lake Mills, we don't get to count. That's not part of our revenue. And, enrollment is the district's seat count, and sometimes that's where confusion can lay, right? So we have always typically more students than we do members. So our Janesville International Exchange Program, those 14 students would be a seat count, but they're not part of our membership because they do not reside here, right? They're not permanent residents. So you'll see 5 columns. The first column is kind of A through I. Column 2 is a descriptor, column 3 is a value, 4 is a value, and 5 is a value. I grayed out those in column 4 and 5 in case you wanted to follow along, but you have the math right there in front of you. So quickly we'll say our 3-year membership is $9,203. We have a revenue limit per member of $11,325. When we add those two together, prior to no exemptions, we have $104.2 million, and I'm going to stop and round there. So really, our revenue per member is $11,325. Let's move on. When we look at D&E, we add exemptions. You're going to say, oh my gosh, what are exemptions? So they're typically non-recurring in our case. One is $14.5 million, year 4 of a 4-year non-recurring referendum. We have an energy efficient exemption from when the district did work back in 2017-18. We get to raise funds for that exemption. We also have, if you will, other adjustments. They're very minor. And then we have something we've not spent a great deal talking about. I'll converse with Superintendent Holtzman and Treasurer Ardrey, Commissioner Ardrey, right? And that is the voucher aid deduction. And what that is we get to tax for vouchers that we're dinged on aid for. Right, so we don't have a lot of voucher schools here in Rock County, but we have 2. Right, so children who attend those schools receive a voucher. That comes out of the general aid pot, right? Comes out of, if you will, a portion of our district's aid, and then we get to raise taxes to cover for the cost of those vouchers. Right, so those are examples of exemptions. We have 17.2 million. When we add C and D, our base revenue of 104 plus all of our non-recurring exemptions, we have 121.6 $137.4 million in terms of revenue. So if we divide that by 9203, what do we get per child? 13,125. So now we have two numbers. If we continue on with F and G, you're going to say, hey, let's talk a little bit about the composition of that revenue limit authority. So we received $75.9 million in state equalization aid. We raised taxes for general fund operations of $45 million. That is within the $121.4 million, a 62 to 37 split. The state of Wisconsin, for children here in the School District of Janesville, is picking up just north of 62% of the tab of educating our children. The balance falls to local taxpayers of 5%. So you say, well, what's our aid per student? Well, it's about $8,253. Well, what's the local tax per student for general operations? Well, that's about $4,992. Then we move on to H&I, and we say, well, we also levy for debt service, and we also levy for community service. So those are additional levies. So when we add in that $6 million, our overall levy and our levy per member dividing by the 9203 is $5,614. So that's the local taxpayer burden for our general operations between Fund 10, Fund 38, Fund 39, and Fund 80. So how much revenue do we get per child? It varies, depending upon the math. Not that the math is incorrect, but what factors are we considering? A little bit more. When we look at J, we have other revenues. I just misreferenced them when we were going through the slide deck. We have other local sources, such as mobile home fees, gate receipts, open enrollment, state sources, such as categorical aid, $742 per member, that 3-year rolling count, right, in student aid. And then we have other resources as well within Fund 10, 700s and 900s. That's another $24 million in other revenues from other resources that we receive as a district. When we add that all together, we're at $152 million. When you divide that by 9203, we're at $16,535. So how much money do we get? So the purpose really of the illustration is there's lots of ways to do the math. It's all correct. I probably have a tendency to look at, well, what is our levy per member for our current membership average? Just about $5,500. That's the local tax burden. But there are just many calculations to arrive at, one, the district's revenue limit authority, which is $11,325, which is split between general aid and local taxes. We tax for a few more funds, and we have more resources. So if it appears as though sometimes I'm trying to, figures lie, liars figure, right? There's just some math in terms of what is it that we're looking for. So we're fortunate as a district between our professional organizations, such as WASDA, Wisconsin Association of School District Administrators, WASBO, School Business Officials, and others to belong to the School Administrator Alliance. And I would contend and support, if you will, those 3 priorities that are outlined in this worksheet. One is a potential increase in the revenue limit per member. 2 is an increase perhaps in the low revenue limit ceiling. And then 3 is an increase in special education reimbursement. Are we going to go 3 for 3 in the upcoming state budget? Most likely not. Okay. It would be awesome, absolutely, Commissioner Ardrey, if we would go 3 for 3. Are there other types of grants out there that are going to be part of the state budget? Absolutely. Sometimes the school of thought is if you fully funded schools, we wouldn't have all these other grants. All right, so we've in the past have talked about how our revenue limit per member, right, varies. You go to my former district, it's north of 14,000 for 24-25. If you go to Verona, another member of the Big 8, right, outside of exemptions, it's north of 15. even if we had another 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000, that's anywhere from 9 to 27 million more that we would have available to us. But we can't get there. The system is good, it just over time has been underfunded. So back to the worksheet. So how much do we get per child? I would say right now, we receive 11,325, but that is not the tax burden locally. There's another side of the coin, of course, when we talk about revenues, we can also talk about expenses. Okay, we're gonna save that topic for another day. So it's already getting long. We're gonna move shortly into the capital plan, the draft capital plan, I should say. So there are even 3 ways to calculate expenses for a school district. Right, so some of them just focus on Fund 10. Some of them talk about, we'll say, expenses not only in Fund 10, but when we look at student nutrition, when we look at debt service, and when we look at transportation. Right, so all of those elements, and there are 3 levels. I'll save that again for another day. Ideally, you would like a balanced budget. Any questions? Yes, sir.
I'm not sure it's appropriate or not, but with bothering, I'm looking here at federal sources such title funding, ESSER, all that. With what's happening in Washington and the possible elimination of the Department of Education, we get money out of that.
We do.
We do, for food service and several other things. Is there any scariness to that?
You may recall, okay, Superintendent Holtzman's gonna get a chuckle. For 15 years, I was a board member in Whitewater, right? So kind of sat in your chair. And I remember one time during negotiations, a fellow board member asked our attorney at the time about pending legislation. And his response, and I partially subscribe to it, is I'll worry about it when it becomes law. Now, we certainly have advocacy in our role as your role as board members and as administrators and as the community, like advocacy. Like, so do we wait until it's law or do we advocate beforehand? In short, I'd say if you were to chat with Tammy Carlson, she manages a number of our federal grants, right? She's mildly nervous. Right? She's very conscientious. If you were to chat with Liz Liedel, our Director of Student Nutrition, she's probably as well mildly nervous. It does take an act of Congress, to my understanding, to abolish a department. But that doesn't mean, right, that rules can't be changed. We receive in student nutrition probably north of $5 million in federal reimbursement as part of the National School Lunch Program. The remaining balance, and I may be a little high on that $5 million, I will tell you more than 50%. I know I'm safe in saying that value on about $6 million. So north of $3 million most likely comes from the National School Lunch Program. If you look at our title funding and other federal funding, Tammy did a presentation a few meetings ago, that probably is pushing north of $7 million.
Okay, some potential fear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions. 1.8, information and planning update on the district's long-term capital maintenance plan.
So I'm going to set the stage. You've heard a lot from me today. I know Dave Leader will go over some items. He'll come up to the podium. Perhaps he'll engage Julie Yorkie to do the same. Julie is our facilities planner, project specialist. She works with Dave and the facilities team. We have over time, since almost before December, like really trying to provide a more robust 10-year capital plan. We're not quite there yet, but we will be there shortly. And it's really, and I would say to some extent, we've had a lot of capital projects on the books that we've been managing the last 4 years. Right, so we've been consumed with that. We've kind of pushed our capital to the side, right? We still did capital work, but really now is the time for us to revisit and provide a more robust plan. So we've been laying some seeds for your consideration to bear fruit. Again, we want to emphasize the fact that the district identified over $900 million in potential capital work, as well as improving our learning environments. The voters approved 151.8. Again, we're very thankful, but that is less than 17% of the overall identified need. And this is where I think a few meetings ago, we spent some time talking about, so what's next? What does our future look like from a fiscal planning as well as a facilities planning perspective? So a little bit about the 10-year capital plan, right? So when we look at dollars, we're looking at today's dollars. We're not adjusting those necessarily for inflation. I think when we reviewed kind of a long-term roof plan, when we projected out, I projected a 4% inflationary index. Keep in mind that the consumer price index travels differently than we'll say the trades index does. So Mike Johnson, who's done some of our other costing, Mike Johnson from Cullen, all right, he'll factor in, but he's not factored in what the remaining 80+% looks like years out. He really factored in an inflationary for this year and next year. We will most likely need to tackle our remaining 80+%, a phase 2 question, a phase 3 question, a phase 4 question. It's interesting, I kind of view Oshkosh very similar to Janesville. In 2000, Oshkosh passed just over $100 million in terms of a debt question to improve their facilities. This spring, they're asking for, I believe, $197 million more. So in 4+ years, nearly 5 years, they will have asked for nearly $300 million to invest in their facilities. And if I were to chat with my counterpart up there, Drew, he'd say, and there's probably more. And I'd say you're probably right, because we have more, and we're very similar. So I wish the folks in Oshkosh success. I think that helps pave the way for districts such as us. When we're looking at our capital planning, we're using Fund 10, which we have about $1 million that we apply towards capital maintenance. We also have Fund 46. I always give a shout out to the board who was here in 2015 for creating Fund 46. There is a 5-year moratorium, so we weren't really able to use those dollars until 2020. When we have dollars left over at the end of the year, typically we have 3 options: fund balance, Fund 73, or a Fund 46 deposit, and we have funded those throughout. And then keep in mind, right, and I think you know this about me, is plans always change. We should always be planning. A plan is not a 3-ring binder plan. Right, we live in a dynamic environment. Our plan needs to be dynamic as well. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the draft. We're not going out 10 years, but we have to have a 10-year plan for Fund 46, right? But again, we live in a dynamic nature, so we want that to be a little more robust. And we're going to again use roofing as an example. Dave will introduce our representative from Apex when he's up at the podium. He happens to be in the back here. He is our roofing expert. So I know his name, but I'll let Dave introduce him. One of the things is I'm like, I have to visualize. I'm a visual learner. So we spent some time working with the facilities group. This is a tab on a worksheet, and this is a heat map. Because I'm trying to get an understanding of if it's green, it's good. If it's red, it's bad. So what we've done, again, using roofing as an example, and we know roofing is a component of our referendum spend. We have approximately $3 million available to us for roofing projects. Keep in mind that initial $3 million was a rough order of magnitude, right? It's a budget number, it's not a bid number, but in working with Apex Building Consultants, we've been able to get bid numbers for forthcoming work, which are very good bid numbers for us to then expand the breadth of our work within our referendum approved funds, in addition to tapping Fund 46. So essentially what we're looking at is Lincoln, Washington, Franklin. Those are referendum approved, as well as Rock River, but we're able to add roof sections at Marshall and at Craig using the remaining balance of Fund 49, the referendum approved funds, as well as a portion of Fund 46. So I'll let Dave kind of talk through how he's working with our consultant. Again, I know his name, I'll just let Dave introduce him. And Julie may have some input as well, but kind of how we're looking to tackle and kind of how to perhaps better read this chart. So I'll turn it over to Dave.
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Jordan Tuminero. Got your last name right? Okay. So the district facilities team has teamed up with Apex. That's who Jordan represents. And he has teamed with us to evaluate all of our roof sections throughout the district at each of our buildings. So I believe you all have a copy of the draft of the 10-year capital maintenance plan. So I'd like to take this opportunity to explain that document to you. Oh, yeah, I can go through this, absolutely. Okay, so we'll go to the heat map rankings. So if you look at this, the roof sections at each building were ranked from 1 to 10. 1 being the poorest, 10 being in the, actually in great shape. Everything in between there kind of reads itself out. We have a lot of 1s. I just want to forewarn you that as we go into this roof replacement process, for example, right now we're looking at doing all of the 1s starting this fiscal year, 25, 26, 26, 27 fiscal years as well to take care of all the 1s that are on this list. Now, here's the caveat. Once we get these 1s completed, some of these 2s may become a 1, okay? So this is going to be an ongoing process we really got to focus on and try to get as much roof work done as possible. Does that explain it good enough? Okay, back to the document. So as you can see under the 24-25 fiscal year, per building, what projects have been completed at all of our buildings. So those are all completed projects. And as you move across to 25, 26, 26, 27 fiscal years, you can see the projects identified per building. Now, please keep in mind that these identified projects are based on the facility assessment report and the POB civil assessment reports that we have received. So basically, this represents a very small portion of the district's overall $900 million of identified needs. So getting back to the roofs, a key part of the 10-year plan is roof replacement. And again, that's been developed in a partnership with Apex and our facilities team. Jordan has evaluated each building roof section and has provided us with a 10-year roof replacement plan. The roof replacement plan, as I've already spoke about, was rated from a 1 to 10. And again, I just want to reiterate that all district buildings roof sections that are rated as a 1 are identified for replacement, spread out in the current fiscal year, as well as the 25, 26, 26, and 27 fiscal years. So after the 1s are done, we move right up the list. Go after the 2s, 3s, etc. Jordan, I was wondering if you could come up here and just do a quick favor for me. Could you share with the committee your bidding process? I think they'd find a great interest in that.
So as Dave said, we start with analyzing all the facilities, boots on the ground, making sure we get and look at what the facility footprint looks like so that they can take that data and then develop that 10-year plan. Then when we get to the project phase, we do the engineering, develop a specification, working with the district so that we have an apples to apples process to take out to the public to bid. We bring in qualified contractors that have had demonstrated success with other school districts, and we get competitive bids from them. So those competitive bids came in well below what the budgeted numbers were, which has allowed Dave and his team to tackle more of the ones in this fiscal year than maybe even we thought we were going to be able, because we got such great numbers. And then from that point forward, we then manage that project to make sure that that low bid contractor does the work per the specifications that we developed, and we have that interface so that it takes that off the district's plate, and we make sure that it's done correctly. If there's any issues, stop that project, correct it, move forward, then do a punch list, close out the project, and then we continue to inspect that roof to make sure that first 5 years that the contractor has a workmanship warranty, we then can make sure that if there is an issue, they're on the hook for it, we identify it, make sure it's done. Then we continue year on, inspecting the roofs, continuing to categorize those things to keep that 10-year plan, which is dynamic, as Dan said, moving in the right direction so that we're always aware of what's coming down the pipe and how you guys can then plan for what's coming. As you see, the 2s, the 3s, those are all roofs that are probably out of their service life, but maybe they just don't have the extent of damage that the 1s do, but they still have damage. It just hasn't reached that critical mass of the 1s. So that's kind of how we do it.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any questions? Yes.
Just a question, I'm looking at this, it says school, then sections. Goes to 27, are those years? Or do we have that many different sections?
We have
on
that
some
many
of-
different sections. Yes, I
schools that
believe,
do
I mean,
work.
if you look at Craig High School, for an example, we have, what do we have, 27 different sections?
Schools have those amounts of broken down sections.
Obviously,
the elementaries, you might have 1 to 8 sections.
Right,
I didn't know if it was years or what, but just.
right, yeah, those are sections.
Okay, thank you.
And all those sections have a different age related to them of when
Makes
that
sense.
roofing system was installed.
I have questions, but I will forego that until letting me study this more and ask more complete questions. So,
As we work through our capital, and Dave can certainly, continue. One, I do want to thank Julie for her assistance, as well as Dave Leader, Dave Farwell. Dave Leader obviously is to my right, but I do want to thank Dave. When you look at this, we shared some of this before in terms of, we'll say, this is the ranking, but what's the life? So we have a lot of aged out roofing that will potentially cause us some issues if we were needed to file an insurance claim. Right, so if you have a brand new Lexus, right, and you smash it, you're gonna get a higher value. If your Lexus is 30 years old, right, the insurance company is not gonna give you perhaps nothing, right? So similar to, because of property insurance and what's happening in Florida, the Carolinas, Virginia, California, right, it's all part of this giant industry, right? So they're tightening their wallets in terms of what they're willing to pay for a claim. Dave may recall, I don't know this, perhaps Ms. Jensen remembers, is there used to be a point in time to where we had the local government insurance pool. If you had a cracked window, you could file a claim and it would be paid for, right? Which is one reason it doesn't exist anymore, Commissioner Dowerhausen, right? So, right, but it was very, not lucrative, but it was very generous in terms of paying off claims. Right, so that doesn't exist anymore. We're solely reliant upon the private sector to insure us. When you look at this heat map, right, this is nearly $36 million in assets. When we look at the 10-year plan, right, we can't afford that 36 million, which we go back to, right, we need referenda dollars for phase 2, for phase 3, for phase 4. What we're trying to illustrate, and what we want to illustrate to taxpayers, is we're taking operational dollars, we're taking those investments from Fund 46, and as much as we can, we are leveraging them into improving our facilities, complementing the 151.8, but still understanding, right, we have a lot more to do.
So then when do you anticipate needing another referendum?
So that was a little bit just to kind of recapture some of that workshop as well as the prior meeting. Certainly, it's the board's decision. I would say 2028. Correct. Operational in 2026.
Susie, can you use your microphone, please? Oh, okay. Thank you. And also, have you, things can go north and south. Have you anticipated any kind of an economic crash or, recession, depression type thing nationally?
Yeah, I have not. I'll also be very, transparent in that I'm not necessarily monitoring that beyond just being an average citizen.
Okay, thank you.
So since this is a draft, the next steps and when?
So I believe we have a meeting scheduled for March. Right? We're in February. Seems as though the year is going quickly. We would hope to have that plan available, the 10-year plan, at the March meeting. I think it's the 18th. I think St. Patrick's Day. Shocker that I remember that that's on a Monday, March 17th. Right? But I would say Tuesday, March 18th, prior to spring break.
So then the 24, 25 items, if we could, I guess, calendarize which ones have been done or to be done, that would be helpful for the committee as we potentially go out and look at buildings. It's like, okay, well, this is on the list. It's good to know that it was actually done or not done. So that'd be
Okay.
awesome. Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next, future committee meeting items. And this isn't necessarily fleshed out, but I guess I gave a little bit of the mindset as we're approaching the staffing plan. And how do we, is there a way to tie our financials with the staffing plan? I mean, I know we do it and aggregate the whole thing, and does that, I mean, if that's all that we can do now, that's okay. But, so part of what and then I guess kind of what I wonder is, our staffing by building is based on students, but then as we look at subs and all of that, how does that factor in? Are we short one location versus another with respect that we end up subbing more per, I guess, staff member in a building? Not just because it's more kids, but just that we have one particular building. It may be more tenured staff, and maybe they're out sick more. Just some of those things I was running around in my head. So I don't know if that is, just, those are my thoughts. So if it's something that we could potentially work through as we prepare to review staffing, that would be great. Any other thoughts or committee items?
Greg,
No, Susan?
microphone, please. Thank you. Sure. Greg, are you still thinking about having field trips to different schools? Is that something you would still like to pursue? Or are you going to wait until we have a new board?
I'll say formally, I would probably at this point wait till we have
Okay.
whatever the committee will be. I'll say maybe on an ad hoc basis, I will
Okay.
visit some buildings and I'll let you guys know, and
Okay,
you're free to
thank you.
join me, but I'm
Thank
not
you.
necessarily gonna say that we're gonna get together, because, well, and quite frankly, as I thought about it,
It's tough, yeah.
considering Commissioner Millard will be going off the board, I'm like, he knows the buildings well.
He'll be an
But
advisor.
it would probably be more advantageous to whatever the committee looks like, assuming I'm the chair, which I'm assuming I will be. Then that would probably make more sense at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Any other topics any committee members would like to see? Okay. Yeah, more money would be good. Okay, If you guys recall that there was a calendarization of topics that Mr. McCray put together, we don't have that in front of us, but we will proceed with the March meeting with that, and then a couple other little pieces that we'll need to do, so. Next meeting?
Thank you, sir.
March 18th?
Not till March 18th.
Yeah, 4 o'clock.
I got it now, 3 to 6.
I can change that.
Oh, okay.
What time do you want?
3 ideally? Okay, all right.
Where we at? 3 to 6.
3 to, and bring a pillow. Oh, we'll start at 3. We've been doing good. We can get better. Hour 20, so. So 3 to 5-ish.
Understood.
Yep. Okay.
I'm okay.
All right, with that, thank you, and we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see, March 8th.